When we think about the British Empire in India, one battle usually comes to mind, Plassey, back in 1757. It's the one we all learn about, right? A wild story of conspiracy and betrayal. But what if I told you that was just the opening act? That the real story, the moment a trading company truly became an empire, happens 7 years later, at a battle most people have completely forgotten. This is the story of the Battle of Buxar, the fight that actually forged an empire. So let's just ask it outright. Which battle really laid the foundation for 2 centuries of British rule? Was it that famous, intrigue-filled victory at Plassey, or was it the much tougher, more decisive, and ultimately way more important fight that came after? And look, this slide really breaks it down for us. Plassey was, for all intents and purposes, a coup. It was won with bribes and backstabbing, and it gave the East India Company a puppet ruler they could boss around. But Buxar was a full-blown war. This was a victory won fair and square on the battlefield against a huge alliance of Indian powers. And the prize wasn't just a puppet, it was the legal right to rule, a total game changer.
So how on earth did we get here? How did a trading corporation end up facing down the combined might of northern India? Well, it all started when that fragile arrangement set up after Plassey began to completely fall apart.
And it really boiled down the money. The East India Company had these things called dastaks, basically a get-out-of-taxes-free card for their trade. But as you can see, they started abusing them like crazy, creating a private pipeline of wealth that was bleeding the local rulers dry. That, plus their constant demands for more and more revenue, pushed the new Nawab of Bengal, a guy named Mir Qasim, right to the edge. So, feeling cornered, Mir Qasim decides he's not going down alone. He puts together this pretty powerful, if a little shaky coalition. He's joined by Shuja Adala, the Nawab of the neighboring kingdom of Awadh, who's looking at the company's expansion and thinking, hey, I'm next. And then, to give the whole thing a stamp of legitimacy, they get the Mughal emperor himself, Shah Alam II, who was hoping a big win could bring back some of his faded glory. And on paper, you'd think this was a done deal, right? I mean, look at the numbers. The Indian alliance had something like 40,000 troops against the company's 17,000. They should have steamrolled them. But here's the thing about warfare. Numbers aren't everything. The company's soldiers were a professional, highly disciplined, well-trained fighting machine. And that difference? Well, it was about to change history. So the stage was set near a small town called Buxar on October 22nd, 1764. But this was way more than just a battle. This was a head-on collision between 2 completely different worlds. This quote from one of our sources just nails it. The East India Company's army was this modern professional force, a geometric, depersonalized machine. Meanwhile, the Indian alliance was more of a traditional feudal army, a disorganized organic mass. It relied on individual heroics, not the lockstep discipline of a unit. And you can see that difference play out right on the battlefield. First, the Mughal cavalry tries to swing around the side, but Major Hector Monroe's lines just hold firm, like a wall of disciplined firepower. Then, his troops push forward and grab a key village, giving them a huge advantage. From there, they just systematically outmaneuvered the Indian lines until the whole thing completely collapsed. It was a tactical masterclass. The victory was, well, it was absolute. The company grabbed over 130 cannons and seized more than 1 million rupees in cash right there on the field. But honestly, the real prize wasn't the cannons or the cash. The real prize was the political power that this victory was about to unlock. Okay, so a military victory is one thing, but turning that muscle into real, legitimate, lasting power, that's a whole other ballgame. And that happened 1 year later, with a single piece of paper that would literally reshape the future of India, the Treaty of Allahabad. So it all comes down to this one single word, Diwani. And this, right here, was the masterstroke. The Diwani was the legal right given by the defeated Mughal emperor himself for a British trading company to become the official tax collector for the 3 richest provinces in all of India. Just think about that for a second. The treaty basically lays out a whole new reality. First, the company gets the Diwani, the right to collect all the taxes. Second, the Nawab of Awadh gets to keep his job, but he has to pay a massive fine and becomes a glorified buffer state. And finally, the Mughal emperor, the supposed ruler of India, becomes a pensioner living on a company's salary. The old power structure was just completely shattered. This was it. This was the moment. Traders officially became rulers. That military dominance they won at Buxar was now stamped, signed, and legally legitimized. The East India Company wasn't just some powerful foreign company anymore. It was now the sovereign authority in northern India, and it had the emperor's signature to prove it.
But what happens when a for-profit corporation, a company whose entire reason for existing is to make money for its shareholders, suddenly finds itself ruling over millions of people? Well, the consequences were immediate, and they were absolutely catastrophic.
The company came up with this system, and it was ingeniously exploitative. They called it the dual system. As you can see, it was simple. The company took all the power and all the money, the Diwani, controlling the military and collecting every last rupee. But they left all the actual responsibility, things like justice, law and order, public works, to the poor Nawab, who now had zero resources to do any of it. It was a perfect system for having all the power with none of the accountability. And the result of that system? Just 5 years after the treaty, 10 million. A famine hits Bengal. Now, it was triggered by a drought, but it was turned into a catastrophe by the company's brutal, relentless tax collection. They kept raising taxes even as people were starving. An estimated 10 million people, maybe a third of the population, died. This was a man-made disaster, born directly from corporate greed. And this quote just gets right to the heart of the new economic engine that Buxar created. See, before, the British had to bring their own silver to India to buy Indian goods. But after Buxar, with the Diwani, they just used the tax money they collected from Bengalis to buy Bengali products to ship back to Britain. The wealth of India was now being used to fund its own conquest. If one image captures this entire, insane transfer of power, it's this famous painting. I mean, just look at it. You've got the Emperor Shah Alam II, looking small on his little platform, handing this scroll, the Diwani, to a confident, standing Robert Clive. It's the visual proof of the moment an empire was signed away, not to a king, but to a corporation. So Buxar is way more than just some dusty old battle. It's a chilling case study of what happens when a commercial entity gets the power of a state. And it leaves us with a question that feels just as relevant today as it was back in 1764. What are the dangers when power, profit, and responsibility are completely separated? It's definitely something worth thinking about.